quorum in the room. Rob Cortell is running late, coming back from Northern Virginia. Surprise, surprise. Something about construction and bridges and those types of things. So the first hour is a non-meeting thing, so we don't need a quorum for that, but we also want to start the conversation. So when Rob here, we'll actually open the executive committee meeting with the quorum and those things that go to. So we'll start off with our stakeholder engagement meeting, and the purpose of this first hour to review and discuss the priorities that have risen from previous conversations. So, you know, I've commented earlier, I don't know whether this is going to be like speed dating or whether or is sufficient time. Certainly, if you're able to make comments or you think of comments that you want to add, you can certainly email them to Jennifer. I wonder why the sentence just ended. The purpose of the discussed priorities of the region for the 2 years. These priorities will be the projects in which Region 6 Council funds over the next 2 years. And as the stakeholders who will work collaboratively to bring forth these projects, your say in what is needed for the region and what the council is key about to discuss priorities.
Thank you, everyone. Getting in today's stakeholder engagement session, on behalf of the Go Virginia 6 Council, my name is Morgan, and welcome you here today. Before we get started, a quick housekeeping. This started and will be to our website. If you have any during today's meeting, please feel free. Anne-Marie will be putting my phone number back. Or if you want to, you can talk with Anne-Marie is our new program coordinator at WRC and will be working with Go Virginia. So also, if you have any comments or questions, free to jump in and ask these questions. This is supposed to be your time to talk to all of us. So please, we want to hear from you. I feel like I missed a slide. Yes. Go Virginia. The purpose of Go Virginia is to create paying jobs through incentivized collaboration. Go Virginia was established in 2016. Virginia funds collaboration between business, education, government, and activities that enhance jobs. We work to align the opportunity, competitiveness, and the of work program with the needs of the region. And just as a reminder, if you all are online, can you please make sure that you are on mute so that we can just avoid any feedback. You all are here today to help Region 6 update our growth and plan, aka our G&T. This is Region 6 document. Projects that are brought to the Region 6 Council must align with the outlined in this plan. The plan was originally written in 2018 and updated in 2019. 2 years. The goal of the session today is to gain a better understanding of what Go Virginia projects are completed and begin developing ideas on what the priorities for the next 2 years. I'm going to try to see if anyone's not muted and mute everyone, because we're getting a lot of feedback in the room right now.
Yeah, it looks like caller 2, and then the phrase is not.
Yeah. So. Okay. Hopefully this helps with the audios as well. So a quick summary of how we got here and where we are with these priorities. Session 1 laid the groundwork. Sessions 2 and 3, we heard from our stakeholders. These sessions 2 and 3 were based around our 3 priority investment areas, which are entrepreneurial ecosystem, workforce development, and site development. The priorities in which you all have reviewed and we're about to see here again today came out of these sessions. So the purpose of today's session is 2 main points. First, to find out if you all agree that the goals, objectives, and strategies outlined are the correct areas in which the stakeholders and the Region 6 Council should be prioritizing in our region. And finally, we'll determine what should be the next steps in moving forward. I'll not be asking you all today to commit to do any of these, but the Go Virginia Region 6 Council cannot move these forward. You all as the stakeholders and actors who do this work daily must move these priorities forward with the help of the Region 6 Council and funding from Go Virginia. So to begin, do you all agree that these are the goals aligned with these issues that need to be fixed in the region? For the entrepreneurial ecosystem, our problem is what activities can we undertake to foster the development of the entrepreneurial companies in the region? How can we foster an environment where existing small and medium businesses can grow? We've developed 3 priorities from this. The first is to develop a strong entrepreneurial ecosystem. The second is to identify, empower, and support entrepreneurs. And the third is to enhance technology commercialization from research centers and institutions. So I'll turn it over to you all as stakeholders to provide feedback on if you agree that these are the 3 goals that best outline our region. Please feel free to jump in.
Curry, you've had a lot of time spent on this and other pieces. Do you have any comments?
Sorry about that, Billy.
That's all right.
I was trying to get off mute. Yes, I think that pretty well sums up the priorities were coming out of the stakeholder sessions, and it's fairly well drafted around the reports you're going to get in a little while from Tom Chapman. So yes, I do think the goals align.
Anyone else?
Hey, Curry, one more. Are they achievable?
Yes, I think they are.
Well, let me ask one more question then. Are there players, entities that we need to bring to the table that have not yet been a part of this conversation?
You know, Billy, as we worked through this, sort of liken the ecosystem to a solar system, where you don't have one entity doing everything, but you've got entities across all of our region, the entirety of it, all working with slightly different approaches, but hopefully not colliding with each other. And you have to have some center of gravity to keep everybody in their orbit, but also providing them additional assets and making sure they're collaborating with each other. So yes, I think we've had pretty good engagement so far from entities. But I also think it's always an open door, and that's the nature of this type of ecosystem, is to always have an open door and a willingness to collaborate and a willingness to allow new partners to keep coming to the table. Probably be able to give you a better answer to that, once we have an ecosystem plan and we've been able to, more aggressively reach out to some entities that may not have initially come to the table because they may not have been aware of it.
Diving a little deeper, I've broken down each of the goals with their objective and strategies. And we're defining these strategies as the potential projects that the region can undertake. Do you all have any comments or questions or thoughts on these objectives and strategies that's under the first goal?
Can I jump in?
Yes.
I was very pleased to see that it is not only for the high growth businesses, but there's also attention being paid to Main Street businesses, because I think communities are more vital when you have both pieces. So I really appreciate the fact that they did that.
Additional thoughts and comments? Okay.
All right, let's go to site development. That should be more fun.
I just wanted to bring up the two other goals.
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead.
If you all have any thoughts or comments on this one, please feel free to jump in. And I can go to the last goal. This one's one we've been talking about a lot in our region, the tech transfer.
I think so much of this discussion is going to be focused around the ecosystem report.
Yeah.
I'd save a lot of my comments for the nitty gritty of
Over
the
that.
report for later.
Later.
Yeah.
Okay. Site development. So our problem for site development is how can the region collaborate regionally to increase the inventory of shovel-ready sites in the region. Keep in mind that BBP's Virginia Business Ready Sites program and Go Virginia are not mutually exclusive and can be used in conjunction to solve this problem. Our goals are to increase the number of business ready sites within the region and to improve regional site development collaboration. So I'll move on to the first goal, increase the number of business ready sites. An objective to fund 10 regionally significant sites, and then the priorities listed underneath that, or the strategies listed underneath that. Thoughts, comments, questions from those are on the table or online?
My first thought was, how much money are we spreading across 10 sites? And if we divide it by 10, is that enough to make any sort of measurable difference in any of these sites? And if they have, and then the definition of regionally significant, does that have equity as part of it, or we're looking at distributing them around? Is it just, because the list of sites we got was heavily focused on Fredericksburg region. So I think that this is, while it's a great goal and it needs to be there, I think it's going to be incredibly challenging to make all of this happen. And the funding seems to me to be the biggest issue. If you don't have a big enough carrot to make any difference, who are we going? What site are we going to get?
Just as a point of information, the list of sites came out of the sites that the localities put forth in 2019. So there were no sites that the Northern Neck or Middle Peninsula, or very few, I should say, that the Northern Neck or Middle Peninsula put forth. So if they're not there, then we can't put our funds into them.
Okay.
So,
I mean, we know how much money we have on hand, right? What does that end up being? I didn't do the math, sorry.
Well, we couldn't fund the 10 that were listed in that report from Breaker Aid. We would, if those were the 10, we wouldn't be able to fund them
So
all.
does that number have to change from 10 to something else? I mean, how many sites can we feasibly fund and make a difference?
Or the state needs to change. And I think Curry made a good point in the prior, one of the prior site development meetings. The state is gonna have to do more. If these are their goals, they're gonna have to do more to help us achieve it. Whether that's this group, or Virginia, BDP, or localities, and I'm speaking for in George County, they're just gonna have to do more.
Well, certainly they're more capable of doing more, whether it's, I'll say the EDP, for the larger sites than we are.
Yeah.
And the Fredericksburg region, which were, you're right, dominated that list, had a number of large sites that would take a lot of money. You know, as I read that, I thought, you know, I'm glad I'm not being paid a bonus or being judged on whether we get 10 of them done in 24 months, because one is, I don't know how we, the Region 6 Council, drive it, because it's really up to the regional EDOs or the counties or, you know, private ownership and companies that want to develop to really drive this more than us. So
If we codify this in our plan, are we gonna have some sort of obligation or expectation that we will hold funds divided equally? I mean, I guess that number is a big number. If that's what we're gonna adopt, I mean, I understand the point about the state, but we're 4 years in, if the state hasn't changed anything yet, this is our plan moving forward. We can't sit around and wait for the state to maybe change. If we're potentially going to get site applications, how do we guide dealing with that going forward?
if I could, since the vice chairman is here, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
All right, we are going to back up and, since we have a quorum, and what I would point out is all votes in the room that may be taken can be done with consensus. But we will roll call for votes from Morgan and Lisa. And pursuant to code 2.2-3708.2, meetings held through electronic communication means the regional council must approve members participating remotely. Their names, locations, and reasons for participating remotely must be included in the minutes. Jennifer, if you would you please read the names, locations, and reason for remote participation, please?
Morgan Quick, meeting location is more than 60 miles from principal residence. Location of station, Richmond County, Virginia. The location is not open to the public as it is home location. Lisa Hull, meeting location is more than 60 miles from principal residence. Location is Northumberland County. Location is not open to the public.
All right, thank you. Any questions? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve council members participating remotely?
So moved.
There's a second. Second, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
You get a roll call from Morgan, right?
Yes, they don't have to approve themselves.
So they can't approve themselves, so we're good.
Yep.
All right, all those opposed say nay. Or none, motion carries. All right, we can go back to
Yes.
where we were on the site plan,
Thank you for that pause.
of the site development. Thank you.
Discussion, if I may.
Sure.
follow up on Kim's point is, what's the number divided by 10?
And I'm looking at the budget right here. I can
I
barely.
mean, that is an important point.
So we have around $3 million available to us right now.
That's for all projects. That's
For
not
all
just
projects,
sites.
not the sites. And so we'll get another $1 million allocation in July. So thinking 2 years, I would say we roughly have $4 million available for projects in general, not just sites.
Yeah.
And this, for additional questions, this doesn't necessarily mean moving things up. Moving sites from a tier 2 to a tier 3 is a lot less costly than doing infrastructure work on 4s and 5s. So if we want to, if the region wants to focus their efforts on just moving 2s to 3s and having all the due diligence done and then the infrastructure be on something else, that can be a priority. Or if you want to say that we want to have a breadth of tier 4s and 5s available, that's going to be more costly.
So what? I mean, what's the ROI on those decisions? I don't remember talking about that extensively in the site meetings, subcommittee. Right, what is better, moving it from a 2 to a 3 or having more higher ranked sites?
Deborah,
Economic development perspective, what's the better ROI?
Deborah Flippo's on the line from who wrote the sites, and Carolyn Powers. They want to jump in with any additional information.
Hi, good morning.
We can hear you, Deborah.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. I don't know that there is an answer to that question. I know that throughout the state, throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, about 70% of sites are tier 2s, and that's not acceptable. That's not going to get you a look from a prospect. So you got to get to tier 3 to remove the risk, basically, and then ideally tier 4 are going to be closer to ready. They're engineered. They're not constructed, or they're not pad ready sites, but they're engineered and shovel ready sites. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, and I never like being too boxing up into anything specifically, but I mean, and I would look to Courier, somebody from the region, to say, if we focused on moving them from a 2 to a 3, but obviously look and would consider other projects, and would that be the biggest?
There are other regions throughout the state that are doing exactly that, getting 2s to 3s and 3s to 4s.
And at least that could be something we could articulate that goal to the localities. This is what our goal is. Look at
right
your
direction.
inventory. Yeah, look at your inventory of 2s and 3s.
And we're not limited to the 10 or 12 that were listed as the priorities in that report.
Right, what if they don't want to put those forward? What if they're not ready?
Exactly.
You know, I mean,
So is there any data that ratifies that moving from tier to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 makes a significant difference, that these sites have been used?
Yes.
So what does the data show? That
Well,
100% of the sites get used at 5, 2%, what?
so you cannot build a building, like a company will not buy a site unless it's
Right.
unless it's ready for 4 to 5.
Right.
And so localities are preparing those sites for businesses to purchase and companies to
So
purchase.
it's all specific before they do it.
Yeah, and so you can,
So it's going to assume it's 100%.
yeah,
And then the second question is, what's the distribution of these various sites across this region?
mostly GWs.
they're clustered in Fredericksburg, the GWRC area.
So they're clustered in Fredericksburg.
Yeah, and it's like in the 5 localities in the Fredericksburg area.
Jennifer, this is Carolyn.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify about that and just reiterate what you said previously, is that these sites were previously characterized, which is why there aren't as many in the Northern Neck region. But on that list of 10 or 11. We did identify, I'm trying to find it here, West Point Industrial Park, and also Tappahannock Industrial Site, the old airport. It's outside the Fredericksburg region.
So two of the X number are outside Fredericksburg.
Correct. But there were only 2 sites in the northern neck region, one of which is a tier 4, which is the Richmond Commerce Park, that were part of the site that have been characterized. I think it's the King Carter and that one. And the King Carter is not zoned for industrial commercial use. It's currently zoned ag.
What percentage of our budget goes to site enhancement?
However much the council wants.
Historically, how much has gone to it?
Been a pretty even distribution amongst, I guess our 2 largest projects have been workforce.
So that's 50% of the total budget? 20%?
Off the top of my head, I'd say 30%. We've done a couple of site characterization projects, and then we had the Richmond County project, but that got pulled, and the Essex County project that got pulled as well.
So that wasn't intentional. That wasn't a strategic decision. That was what happened after we reviewed projects that came to us.
Yeah.
There was not an affirmative intention to spend X% of the money on site.
4 million that was discussed earlier that's dedicated towards either site characterization or site development. Is that true as well?
Not reserved. It is available.
That's for the whole, that's for everything, right?
Yeah, but it's also available for workforce
Okay.
and yeah.
So I mean, I just wonder if it makes sense to put a number like 10 in there. It seems arbitrary and frankly not feasible. And I wonder if that objective needs to be more tailored to say the goal is to move as many tier 2s to tier 3s as possible, and also entertain moving 3s to 4s or whatever, but to be able to give that flexibility to the localities to say, bring us your project. This is our focus. Here's what we're going to be looking at. Instead of saying 10 and throwing the door wide open, even if we use all that money and divide it up, I mean, it's still not all that much.
So I wonder if we couldn't have a goal to increase the number of business ready sites greater than 1 or 2 hours from the Fredericksburg region.
What was it again, Rob? To do what?
If we couldn't set a goal of increasing the number of business ready sites outside the Fredericksburg region, 1 to 2 hours away.
Well, that would mean we'd go down to uncharacterized sites, right? If we only
Fine.
got a handful, if even like 2 on there.
Yeah.
I think I mean, Lisa and Morgan, are there uncharacterized sites in the northern neck? Because that was the request in 2019 to provide all of those uncharacterized sites and become characterized. So what's changed in 2 years? That would be the question.
The Westmoreland site is not characterized. The blue and gray, the site of the blue and gray supermarket, but it does meet the 25 acre threshold. So I don't know if that counts. But what I was going to say earlier is, I agree. I think 10 is a huge lift because how many projects have come out of the Fredericksburg area, which is where the greatest cluster of characterized sites is? Has any project come out of there?
You mean you're requesting funding from us?
Yeah.
No.
Well, I think going from 0 to 10 is going to be tough because the 3 basically implementation projects we've had, Essex, Richmond County, and Westmoreland, even though this council has gone forward with them for various reasons, none of the 3 is going to come to fruition through Go Virginia.
So what if we just go with Kim's suggestion and just take the number 10 out? And we're still funding, we're doing some, or we're working towards a goal of doing some. It's just not locking in a number.
And I guess, Rob, that would potentially open the door for, they're not characterized. So tell me this, does that open the door for Rob's suggestion? If there is a very attractive uncharacterized site, if the funding investment would get it to a 3, would it be able to be part of the mix?
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things I thought we discussed around with drug rating last executive committee, I guess, is that, and it was more likely that there are uncharacterized or unidentified sites in the northern half of Middle Peninsula that could come forward for exactly what you're talking
Would
about.
have to be able to get to it.
Should something present itself to them.
Moving on to the next.
Well, anybody object to just taking the 10 out and say fund regionally significant sites? And then we'd have to take the 10 out in that last bullet. Any objections to that?
And is there a way to say something like encourage the identification of new potential sites across the Go Virginia 6 region? Other parts?
I have bullet 3 is develop list of uncharacterized sites.
Well, I go further. I think, as in many things, if you sit and wait, nothing happens. Whereas if you actively go out and talk to people and solicit, you might actually get something.
Remind me of that when we finish.
Okay.
All right, the next one.
So my only comment on the next one was, we've already started down this road because we funded FRA to do some purpose. What's the status of the current efforts to get those established at the local level?
Corey, do you want to comment?
It's a slog.
Well,
When-
let me ask you a question. Since you've, I've just been fighting this now for coming up on 18 months or so. And Morgan, I know you've been sort of working on one as well. Are these even possible?
Billy, Morgan may have a different answer than I do. Ultimately, I think we'll get one established, but it won't include all the jurisdictions in our footprint. Because I think a number, at least 2, probably 3 of our localities understand that it's a tool that you may never use. But it'd be better to have it at least established and organized, such if a really good opportunity presented itself and the jurisdictions couldn't do it on their own. I just have to confess that, actually we've been talking about this, Billy, more like 4 years than just the last 18 months.
Yeah.
And the places that seem to get this done are places where they're not doing okay, where they've got some fundamental economic challenges across several localities. And the only way they're going to get anything done is they're going to have to do it together. By and large, our localities are doing pretty well. So when you're urging elected officials to do something when they're actually doing okay, it's not a very compelling story. And this sort of thing, they have to be transformational in some way. So if you were dealing with 5 very distressed communities, it'd probably be easier to get this done.
Okay. Morgan, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I do. From my perspective, I think that this will be successful at some point in time, but I think it's going to be successful once the counties can come together to jointly own a facility. I think it's going to be difficult, and I'm not just talking about the Northern Neck. I'm just talking about regionally. When you don't have jointly owned facilities and you're competing against each other, it's going to be difficult. You can do revenue sharing, I understand it, but I guess one of my ultimate goals, and it's a long-term goal here on the Northern Neck, would be to jointly own property, industrial property with the other counties to be able to have the same amount invested. Everybody has skin involved, and I think it could be successful at that point. Until then, I think it's going to be a challenge.
Really, my thinking on this was, I know when we first started talking about reckless 4 years ago or whatever it was, it seemed like this was really key to site development. It seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that sentiment has sort of faded a little bit, that we were all gung ho about it. We were going to do workshops across the region. That seems to have cooled the interest in doing that. But to have this as a separate goal on here, if we're already going down that path in many ways, seems just to me almost redundant. Might it be more advantageous for us to break out number one and focus on already characterized sites, what we want to see there, and then have the second goal focus on Rob's point of uncharacterized sites and other outside of the GWRC region? Because this just seems like it's already happening, and it's the political forces that are going to determine whether it goes through, not necessarily our funding mechanisms. That's just my thought. And correct me if I'm wrong on any of
that. No, I don't think you're wrong. I think you would be better off focusing on uncharacterized sites. I didn't speak up when Rob made his point about uncharacterized sites across the region. We're going to come forward potentially with a fairly large uncharacterized site request to do a characterization in our region. It's not like all of the sites in our region, have been fully characterized just based on the 2019 study. The other thing you have to remember, it's not somebody arbitrarily picked those sites. They were put forward by the localities, and there was no cost for the characterization in 2019, where this is going to require a match to get a characterization. The issue is still up to whether you have localities who want to do this sort of thing or just have no interest in it. I don't know how you get around that.
I think if it was perhaps broken out, characterized versus uncharacterized, there'd be a very clear home for a project like Curry is talking about, and one that may come out of the peninsula.
If I can comment, I think that whether or not people respond to this depends from year to year on Board of Supervisors in each of these counties, which swing wildly politically and in other views. And so this is again where I think on a lot of things that if this is to be region-wide, whatever we do, parts of the region continue to be left behind, partly because of leadership or lack of it. And this is where we find a way to reach out and educate. We might actually be able to make a greater impact around the region rather than in just one place that doesn't frankly need it most of the time because they got more money. But they've also, because they've got more money, got more people who know how to get more money. Does that make any sense?
That makes perfect sense. And I'm saying that as a member of the governing body and someone who worked on staff in economic development. And when I came on, we had in King George, we had one person doing economic development, and that was the director.
Yeah.
And then I was hired part-time the first year, and they made me full-time economic development specialist. So then we had 2 full-time people doing economic development. And that's it. And that's still how it is. And it's been 4 years since I came on staff in 2017. So yeah, the big ones who have the tax base to support having a big staff to be able to implement these kinds of things are already out there on their own,
Right.
able to do it. And then we're a little guy, kind of like what Curry mentioned earlier with the RIFA, where we think we see the potential in that and see value in that there would be a return on the investment, whereas some of our bigger partners don't. So I fully agree with what you're saying, that it is driven by political will. It's the
Right.
nicest way to put it.
Right. Yeah. Or lack of.
Yes.
Or lack of understanding. You know, and there's NIMBYism too, no doubt, but still.
Anybody ask for a printed version of the, I sent it to you, the, you got it. I do, right here. Okay. Oh my God, my notes on there. I just wanted to make sure.
Same one I have, yeah.
Yeah. Well, if anybody needs a copy, I did come prepared, but thank you.
So I don't know how to implement what I just said, so
That's something that we can discuss further at our executive committee meeting. There's potential for council to work on.
I was gonna ask what the process is for these. This is the document, but are we motioning today? Are we changing them? We're just reviewing.
We're
We're
reviewing
So
Seeking input.
we would take these comments that we have back to our next either committee or council meeting. Okay.
Probably move on to workforce.
Yes.
Can I go back one slide to the site? Okay. My
Just wanna-
understanding is that a RIFA is just the authority, not, and the revenue sharing agreement is a tool under the authority. If Carolyn or somebody could clarify that, because I think here we're
No,
defining
that's,
a revenue
you're
sharing as a
correct.
RIFA.
you're correct. A RIFA, you don't have to have a revenue sharing agreement to create the RIFA. The revenue sharing is negotiated amongst the jurisdictions when they come to want to do a site collaboratively. The investment in the revenue share is part of a participation agreement that is simply administered by the RIFA on behalf of those jurisdictions. So the RIFA itself does not have a revenue sharing agreement in it.
Right, so I think we should reword this objective. Do we want them to have a revenue sharing agreement, or do we want them, or as part of the RIFA, or do we just want the RIFA? Because I think that's kind of, the devil is definitely in the details here.
Okay. Could you say and/or in between revenue sharing agreement?
Yeah.
Probably the more important one is the RIFA itself.
Well, you can have a revenue sharing agreement on a site outside of a RIFA. It's just convenient to use the RIFA because that's why the General Assembly set them up, was so that you didn't have to go through trying to figure out a legal structure to administer an agreement. So by its very nature, I would encourage getting the RIFAs set up so people know they're there. And it's an educational process, as Rob has pointed out. And I wouldn't say anything about revenue sharing because they'd have to have one if they ever came to an agreement on a site.
I know we can go down the rabbit hole on this one, but I think this is a conversation that we can continue, right, in our executive meeting.
If anyone has additional thoughts on sites, please feel free to email us as well.
Yes.
On to workforce, the 3 major workforce challenges that the region faces. How can we align Virginia talent with current and prospective job opportunities, adapt education and training programs to meet the current and prospective Virginia business needs, and then attract and retain talent from outside of Virginia? I'm going to dive deeper into these and we can talk about each one of them. So the first one, adapt education training programs to meet current and prospective business needs. Thoughts, questions, comments on this? We do have some of this work already in our pipeline from studies that we're currently working on. So I made sure to put those as completion goals. Okay, next one. Align Region 6 talent with current and prospective job opportunities. And these were all taken from conversations that we've had in the workforce discussions.
Hey Jennifer, it's Shannon.
Hi.
Hey, I think this works, but I would say I don't want us to compete. There are other funding sources for internships and apprenticeship programs. There's funding available through Chev. There's just a lot of money out there for that right now. So I think it's good, but I don't know that we want to use our funds to support some things that might be funded better by somebody else.
Didn't we just get some money for that though, specifically?
We did not, so we were asked to help guide.
I think it's just something we need to keep in mind that there are other funding streams available.
Yeah, I definitely have heard over and over from the state is that if they were going to do something in the workforce realm, what other sources of funding could have been used and why weren't they used, and what does ours do differently? This is something to keep in the back of everyone's minds.
Hey, Shannon, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I read this and I think it's all very aspirational, but it seems to me there's a lot of moving parts in getting this to work. There's folks like you at the community college level. There is K through 12, which is a whole nother fiefdom. And then you've got to get a large group of employers to participate in these things. Do you have any thoughts on how that works and is it achievable? And
Yeah, the employer part is key. I'd also say for community college students, I mean, we can preach the value of internships, but most of our students, and I'm talking over 80% of our students, are part-time and they already work. So we've got to make sure that what we're doing is paid. Everything's got to be paid. Otherwise, they can't do it. They just can't, even if they'd understand the value of it, logistically, they can't make it work. So it is, you're right. I think it is a heavy lift. It sounds great. The universities, of course, can really push it, but they have residential younger students, not the same students that we're addressing.
If I could jump in, this is Marty Bowers Baldwin with Rappahannock Goodwill. In these discussions, there's a lot of momentum and interest on this with the paid internship. I think for two reasons. One, you mentioned fiefdoms. I think that's right. Like there's a lot of silos. And so to have an intermediary that can connect students, educational systems with employers and business associations, I think is huge. That's one. And the second part was work readiness training, making sure that the students or job seekers have those soft skills that businesses need and want. So I think there is a role there for making some connections. And the discussions we had between both education partners and businesses, this was something that was seen as a good best practice to get people launched in careers in the area.
In the weeds of the strategies, but I think for small and medium-sized businesses, we have 7 people in our office. When we had an intern, it's often more work to start with than it is helpful. I think maybe having some training for those smaller businesses to show them how they can make internships work for them. Because I know that that's a big challenge in a small office. The last thing you need is more work to get this person up to speed. So maybe some ways that other folks have used interns that are quick study and can turn around and actually be a low cost help on maybe a certain project or a certain time of the year when they're slower. But I think that a hesitation for a lot of small and medium companies is just the workload that adds having an internship program.
So I have a question, which is, does the whole approach align with the reality of the workforce of the future, which is in many industries largely distributed? So what in here is addressing finding job opportunities for people who live here outside of the region that might provide higher incomes and for which they don't have to commute or move. So my company, the entire workforce is distributed, ranging from Washington State down to North Carolina and across the country. So in theory, for example, my company might be a potential employer. The average salary is in the $130,000 range. What are we doing here that would align with something like that?
Those are employers that are not necessarily located here, which that's kind of the reverse point of Go Virginia. That's supposed to be businesses here supporting workers here, not assisting workers to get a job somewhere else, right?
Well, but you could argue that a remote employer is establishing a remote job or office here for every employer that it hires. So my question again is, what are we doing to align this with the realities of the new workforce and the new industrial organization?
Well, I think we're supposed to be creating higher paying jobs in the region.
Well, those would be higher paying jobs.
I agree.
Higher paying than they.
I'm not, to be honest with you, in the workforce development ones I sat in on, that subject never came up. I think everybody was focused on what's here in front of us,
So it's
not what
so
is
it's the
located
old,
someplace else.
yeah, but it's the old industrial model, which doesn't exist anymore.
Well, there's
a handful of.
there are certain jobs that still require you to show up every day.
Sure.
In a place.
And I think the
So
big for a lot of these was.
So to answer your question, no, it doesn't address
The
it.
last
I'm not
few
sure,
don't.
I'm not sure we know.
The last three of these don't.
Well, and frankly, Rob, this is just my perception, is a lot of the businesses we talk to, like, Restaurant, we've got Steve on here, I don't think he's here today, but when these are manufacturing jobs, a lot of these are trades, skilled trades, the building trades, automotive, that kind of stuff. Those are not the kind of jobs you're talking about. I think it's a different.
Well, this one
of
right here
workforce.
is professional, scientific, and technical services, information separately from data centers, distribution separately from logistics.
Sure, but when I read through this and I think of non-degree programs, certificates and credentials, it's more in the hands-on trades than it is. Not that it can't be certainly cybersecurity or technical or something like that, but I think that a lot of the focus from Germana and RCC are on those things you can touch, see, feel trades, not.
Well, so the problem stated here is how can we solve the three major workforce challenges that the region faces? Aligning Virginia talent with current and prospective job opportunities, many of which are not here and are higher paying potentially. Two, adapting education and training programs to meet current and prospective Virginia business needs, many of which in higher paying categories are not ever going to locate here. Yet there may be people here who could train for it. IT doesn't necessarily require you to have a 4-year college degree, and yet IT is a heavy duty
And
requirement.
we've made big investments in cybersecurity.
Attracting and retaining talent from outside Virginia. So I think somehow we really have to get away from thinking about this in traditional ways. Mr. Chairman, you know more about it.
No, I'm.
From the workforce people on the call or in the room.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, go ahead, Kurt.
it's Curry. Not trying to debate with Rob, even though it would be fun. I do want to point out that one of the largest and fastest growing certification programs at Germana is in cybersecurity.
Right.
and it's actually nationally recognized. So, but they've also got the Virginia Asphalt Pavers and Road Builders Association funded a program to certify people to work in road building because they couldn't fill those jobs either. So I guess I don't view it as either or mutually exclusive. I think you're going to constantly have to change and adapt to what the workforce needs within a region are. And while it was not a large topic of conversation, I think it was pretty well understood that that's just the nature of how workforce works. And I'll defer to Froze because she was the facilitator, but I did want to point out that Germana is not seeing it as an either or.
Thanks, Curry. Yes, I would agree with that. And I would also just note that a lot of the themes and the ideas that are being captured here were the ones that were surfaced in the discussions that we had with stakeholders. So I think that we're reflecting some of what we heard. Having said that, I think, as has been pointed out, that the Go Virginia emphasis is more on, the employers that are based here. But I do think what the point being made about how to address, retention of, how to have more remote work in the region is an important one. And I think that, especially as broadband services get better, I think some of those options become more pervasive. So
Froze, you and I hang out in the same circles in Washington, so you know exactly the companies I'm talking about that could well be recruiting and creating permanent jobs down here and remotely. So as an example, Matthews County was at 60% broadband penetration. By the end of the year, we'll have 98%. So that opens up hugely different job opportunities. So
Let's do this. If you have thoughts about or words to put with your thoughts that we can incorporate into this, then I think we can consider adding it at the meeting.
I'm gonna consult with Froze on that a little bit, since she and I sometimes think alike. Okay.
Okay.
sounds good.
Any final thoughts on workforce?
Rose, did you have something you want to say?
No, I think I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. We have kept you for the hour that we promised. Is there any last comments? I'd like everybody's hearts and minds to be clear. To have anything, speak up now. Okay, hearing none, we will, I guess, adjourn this part of the session or end it. You are more than welcome to hang on if you wish for the next session. We are going to take a short break, like called a bio break for about 10 minutes, and we'll be back at 10:40.
Mute.
All right. We are going to reconvene. Here, let me go. Let me get that. All right. Well, for those who are still on the line, thank you for your involvement earlier in our conversation. I think that was helpful. Now would be the time in our executive committee for public involvement. Did we receive any request for that?
No.
Okay. We did not receive any request for public involvement. Nevertheless, I'll ask if there's members of the public that are not on the agenda, if they would like to speak. If so, start talking, I guess. All right, hearing none, we will move on.
I was gonna say hello. I just
I'm
didn't
sorry.
want to interrupt anybody.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Robin Schick. I'm the mayor of the town of Colonial Beach. And I've just been listening in, and I just wanted to introduce myself to the board and also to invite you all to come visit Colonial Beach in your region. And however I can help foster a relationship with the board in our town, our small little town that doesn't meet any of the criteria for those very large sites, that I would still, we're very interested in economic development. We've really started to kickstart a lot of growth in that way. We have the largest development in our history, probably since the 50s when the casinos came in. It's called the Dotson Development project, and it's a 4-phase development happening in Colonial Beach right now. We went to closing on phase 1. We have 3 more phases to go. We also have an economic development committee formed through our Chamber of Commerce, and so Mike Fitzpatrick has been attending some of these meetings. So if you've seen him, that's in coordination with us, and we are working with RCDI and a group through UVA on doing some market analysis right now, and also looking to partner with some of our educational partners in the region. I saw Shannon on here with RCC, also with Mary Washington or Germanna or whoever we can partner for developing some help for our small businesses. And so I just wanted to say hello, and if this seemed like the appropriate time to do that. So thank you.
Thank you. We have an item on the consent agenda. Is the approval of the August 16th meetings. Any changes or corrections? Hearing none, can we have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Second. All those in the room, please say, if you're in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, roll call.
Morgan Quick, Lisa Hull,
Aye.
consent on those.
All right, then we are good to go. All right, first, next item of business is an action item. It's the Riot Pre-Accelerator Program, which is a COVID ERR fast access request. So, Jennifer.
Good morning, everyone. Before you today is the Riot Pre-Accelerator Program, and I just want to point out that Rachel Newberry is on the line representing Riot, and so is Tom Snyder. I just saw him join, so hi. So they are here if you have any questions. Quickly, the applicant is the Wireless Research Center doing business as Riot. They are applying for ERR fast access funds, in which this project falls under our amount that we have remaining. They are going for all of our industry clusters. This is a broad-based project. They're serving the localities of Caroline, King George, Spotsylvania, Stafford, Westmoreland, and the city of Fredericksburg, with participating localities, the city of Fredericksburg, King George, and Stafford. And then a whole host of other partners, only having a letter of support, however, from the Fredericksburg Regional Alliance. They are requesting $96,807 from Go Virginia with a match of $56,621, and that's coming from a combination of Riot and Stafford Economic Development Authority in kind match. Quickly for a project description, Riot will launch 3 6-week programs to help idea stage entrepreneurs launch new businesses. In addition, they will hold 18 information sessions to assist people into the program. The outcomes of this project is 18 entrepreneurs served or businesses, and then 18 information sessions held. The use of the Go Virginia funds is broken out, with the majority being used for staffing costs and then travel, materials and supplies, venue rentals, and etc. Main staff concerns summarize on how does this project directly help businesses and entrepreneurs recover from the effects of COVID. Ryan answered this question to say that the key part of the accelerator is teaching businesses how to navigate these market shifts and therefore how to recover from these effects. The other question remains is how is this project going to serve each of the region's targeted industry clusters that Ryan has said that they will engage with. And they said that their programs are intentionally broad-based to be able to achieve these industry clusters. The council review was done by Billy Beal and Rob Portell, and their questions are summarized on the screen, and then the answers provided by Riot. They wanted to know what have they done with previous Go Virginia funding they have received. They had done an ECB study in conjunction with Stafford Economic Development and another implementation project. And the study showed that there was additional services needed in the region, and the current implementation is underway, but it's serving businesses that are already past the idea stage and ready to grow. So the other things being is that how have they done their previous workshops during COVID, and they put that they responded to the market shift and figured out how to teach businesses to respond as well. I will pause there to allow any questions from the council.
Rob and I have probably already gotten our pound of flesh out of this thing. So Kim or Lisa or Morgan, if any of you have questions, Kim, you're handy. I'll let you go first.
Okay. So I noticed in the matrix that was done by staff that it said there's no detailed involvement from great businesses within the region. If we're focusing on emergency recovery because of COVID, how do they, if there's no business support, how do they know they're tapping into something that's a problem? And if they have reached out to businesses, why aren't we seeing a letter or something from G-Cubed or any of the other businesses who are potentially going to be helped?
So maybe as a point of clarification, some of the partners that were listed are not specifically the businesses that are seeking to be helped here. Those are partners that we have worked with collaboratively around kind of just engaging some of those different technology sectors that were listed and engaging in the community and drawing in support. So we didn't mean to imply that we have already pre-selected which specific businesses would be served. To the question about, I guess, broader COVID support and engagement, we see a lot of similarity between when we originally launched our nonprofit after the tech recession of 2008, 2009, and people realizing, either they had been displaced from jobs and were seeking entrepreneurship as a potential path back out of, that impact, or they had been in businesses that suddenly were realizing they couldn't do business the way they had previously and they needed to adopt new technologies. And this pre-accelerator is really targeted towards supporting those folks that are either exploring an entrepreneurial journey for the first time and need that support, or are looking at creating a significant pivot in their business. And we reach them through the various marketing channels that we listed in the application. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
May I add? But for our part, I would offer this to the other localities too, that we can certainly work with Riot and reach out to the businesses that got, for example, COVID grants from us, the CARES Act grants. Say, here's, we can proactively reach out to those kinds of companies and this project and program.
And so and forgive me for being ignorant of what's out there now, but I know the SBDC had a lot of money on hand post-COVID. How did these services, are they different? Is it just a capacity issue with the SBDC? Because it seems to me that that would be exactly what that group did, was help businesses transition to,
SBDC primarily was financial support.
Okay.
And the SBA and various other. It wasn't the discussion and dialogue.
So there isn't a place you can refer people come to you and say, okay. Okay, I'm good, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay. Lisa? Any comments?
My question was going to be similar to Kim's, and I would like to see greater collaboration with the SBDC. You mentioned Mary Washington, but I wasn't sure if it was what part of Mary Washington, and specifically they're an SBDC host, and working through them I think would be fruitful. I'd like to see more collaboration there.
You want to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely agree with that, Lisa. I appreciate the comments. I think a huge part of our marketing and outreach strategy is to collaborate with regional partners that also support businesses in the community. So we will absolutely continue to work with those folks and to strengthen relationships to recruit other businesses to complementary and additional resources that we can provide on top of what the SBDC and other groups already do. Mr. Chair, how do you want to put a tangible into this application? I can have them included going to the state, which is Friday, or in contracting, or just a deadline into our process.
I don't know. But let's see if, while I'm thinking and cogitating on that, Morgan, do you have any questions?
Billy, I have no questions. I have absolutely no experience in this market, and therefore have no intelligent questions to ask.
Okay. You have anything you want to add?
No.
Okay. I've got one, the match that's coming from Stafford County EDA and Riot. Is any of this double counted with the prior matches? No.
I can answer for Riot. No, there's no double counting.
All right.
And what is the nature of the match?
From Riot's side, it is staff time and resource, if you will. It's salary match.
So it's the space that we did not use match in the other one. It's actually a physical location and the estimated rent that would cost.
Okay, I guess, and thank you for trimming this application down and tightening up the geography. I think it seems to make more sense. I guess if I've still got some concerns is, basically the partners that we've got here are the same partners we had in the first application for the most part, yet we've only got a letter of support from one of them. And I would have thought that, based on what you've done with the first application, the others would have been more than willing to provide you with a letter of support, which would frankly have made me feel better. The other is, I still think this, this is supposed to be rapid response for COVID, and this is a 15-month application or process that we're going through. And we're paying staff. So as we're moving down through this, if we hold milestone number 2 and only 2 business owners show up and you don't meet that milestone, we basically have already spent close to half the money. Or close to that. So I've got, I mean, what do we do at milestone 2 where you're supposed to be serving 6 businesses, you've only served 2? Do we end the contract or just not fund it? How are y'all thinking about that?
We're open to structuring the contract with appropriate clawbacks or kind of performance measures as need be to give you the assurance that it's money that is not wasted and that we're handling it appropriately. So one potential path would be just to structure the contract up front that recognizes, our need from a cash flow point of view to operate, and also that we have to deliver. And if we don't deliver, then we could put appropriate clawbacks or what have you in place. I'd also just real briefly say, I'll take responsibility on the letters of support. I think that was a misunderstanding on our part on what was required for the application process itself. We were under the understanding we needed letters of support from the localities that were supporting us, and FRAs applied one and so on, but we were not under the understanding that there was a request for letters of support from those other industry partners. So we did not ask or solicit those.
Yeah.
So that was our mistake.
Well, that's just one of my personal preferences, that if you're going to list people as being partners and all, that we ought to at least feel like they understand that's what they're doing.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So, all right, Rob.
I do have a question. Actually, in an earlier conversation this morning, we were discussing workforce development, and I raised the issue of how could we take advantage of the development of distributed workforce, particularly in certain technology industries, under our own planning, that not every industry actually had to move here to be here. And I'm just looking at your number 2, where you're saying you help companies identify opportunities in the data economy, and we have 90 global data economy partners. So I'm just wondering if there is some potential synergy here, or some way we can take advantage of it in this.
So the short answer is yes. Whether or not it's under the auspices of this specific application or not, we do work with many multinational technology partners that are increasingly offering workforce development programs and certifications, like Salesforce certifications, Cisco certifications, things like that. And those are things that can often be done remotely and by workers that then work from home. And so we'd be happy to, help introduce some of those corporate programs that have those, corporate partners that have those programs, and see if there are ways to market and promote those in the region. Absolutely.
Do you have any idea off the top of your head what a typical Salesforce analyst might make?
I don't know exact numbers, but if I were to venture, it's going to be in the 50 to 70K range as an entry salary.
To my point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Other questions or comments? Okay. Anybody willing to make a motion to approve this and move it forward? And to answer your question, we'll do it the thing in contract. We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. I sounded reluctant. Well, we have a motion and a second.
We will call those.
Yes, you do. So we'll start with Morgan and Lisa and go around the table.
Roll call for those on the line. Morgan, Lisa Hall,
Aye.
those in the room.
Aye. Okay. Aye. No.
Okay.
It's always good to go last.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. I'm enough. I think it's the wrong program.
Yeah.
It's fast action, that kind of stuff. All right, thank you. Congratulations, Tom and all. It's Rachel. It's we'll get it to the state. And do they need to provide anything before that?
No.
No. All right.
So I'll be in touch with you tomorrow just to summarize and tell you what I'm doing in terms of next steps.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Well, thank you again for the consideration and the time, and it's on us now to deliver.
Thank you.
Yep,
All
thank you.
right. Old business growth and diversification plan.
Yes.
Do you have anything we want to specifically cover?
No.
Okay. Anything now that we're just the executive committee have anything they want to add to the prior conversation or anything, or feel like we covered it all?
No, just to clarify, Jen said that at the next meeting, full council meeting is when we will potentially address any edits that need to happen to those.
Yeah.
That matrix of objectives and strategies and goals.
And well, so we have the full council meeting in October, and they've seen the draft priorities, because they got the email with the draft priorities. And I'll make sure to send it out again, and say that we'll talk about it at the October meeting. And they can make additional comments, edits, anything that they want. And that all the stakeholders will continue to get emails from me to say, are there comments, are there questions, or if you weren't there and you want to send like something back to me, please feel free. And then we have 2 more executive committee meetings before this needs to be finalized. The whole plan needs to be finalized and sent to the states. So that's where we are right now. In terms of specific for the growth and diversification plan, also is the entrepreneurial ecosystem reports, which is in your plan. And Tom Chapman and Larson Garvey are online to talk about that today and ask any questions that you have, or answer any questions that you all may have. So I'll turn it over to them to talk. And Tom, do you have a PowerPoint or need control of anything?
I do have a PowerPoint. So I'll put it up, and hopefully I'll put it up and you guys can take a look at it.
Yeah.
Are you seeing a PowerPoint right now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to walk through this. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on slide 3, which is probably a good place for questions. So normally when we go into a place, we start off by just trying to map the ecosystem. So we start in the middle with entrepreneurs and the individual actors. This was a little bit of a different project because a big chunk of the project was to look at what Techonomy had done and sort of dovetail off of what they've done. We've put it back into sort of our framework of thinking about it, but we've been intentional about trying to include their metrics and things where we could. There were a couple places where I would say we made fairly significant changes, the biggest of which is in our peer city analysis. We felt their peer cities were really geared towards the entire state of Virginia, and we tried to be more intentional about targeting peer areas that were more germane to Region 6. We just didn't know that you were going to get a lot of analysis if we were looking at Raleigh, Durham, and some of the other large communities that they had in the report. So while we are very comfortable with those places, it just didn't feel as helpful. So as we go through this, feel free to sort of stop and say, well, why did you do this? Or this is a little bit different. And we're happy to talk through those things. So this is basically the mental map that we use when we talk about ecosystems. So we start by identifying entrepreneurs. And I would say in general, as we go through the data in a place, we're really thinking about the entrepreneur with the lens that says, does this help the entrepreneur? Does it hurt the entrepreneur? What are the types of entrepreneurs? So in the context of Region 6, I don't know who said it, but earlier there was a real, somebody called out the idea that it's important not just to focus on high growth businesses, but also to have some awareness and focus of Main Street businesses. That was particularly true as we went through the data. It was very interesting to look at big chunks of the region where there is not necessarily a dominant city, And so the main streets were actually real pulls for both population as well as opportunities, I think, to expand the business base. So I'd be intentional about not excluding Main Street businesses to simply focus on high growth businesses. So looking for individual actors, looking for those entrepreneurs is an important part. And because of the diversity within the region, we were pretty thoughtful about saying, you know, veterans should be a high priority. You know, the region is weird in a good way because it has a high percentage of veterans. So being intentional about programs that provide dollars and resources to veterans, which is a group that generally starts more businesses per capita than the average American. So that's one thing that we called out. Second thing would be women. You know, there's a real disparity between sort of the northern counties of Spotsylvania and Stafford and Fredericksburg with the rest of the region with regards to the number of women-owned businesses. Being intentional again about trying to get more women-owned businesses, particularly along Main Street, is an important thing that we saw. We then support kind of our idea of identifying entrepreneurs by going around kind of this box with the 4 supporting activities. So knowledgeable community is really about making sure that we're speaking the same language with each other. So when we say venture capital, do we all mean the same thing? When we say loans, do we all mean the same thing? But one of the things we noticed was because the region is sort of separate, there was not what we would call a dominant news source that was telling hero stories about entrepreneurial things. So there might have been a local paper that was really good on the county or in their individual community, but they weren't necessarily something that was going to spread that message across the entire region. We think it's important that the region think about how to make sure that if something's going on in Colonial Beach, that folks in Fredericksburg know about it, so do folks in Gloucester, so that that conversation is happening. Connecting activities, you know, this isn't just events, but the idea of events was important. One of the things that we saw out there was we thought events that were targeted at technology were okay, but those that were targeted more at makers, inventors, et cetera, could be improved. And we thought particularly across the region, being intentional about connecting those activities might provide means for some of those businesses to get mentorship from somebody who's not necessarily right next door, but 50 miles away. We thought that was an important thing. In addition, just the intentionality of building up the network. From a financial capital perspective, you know, one of the things that was easy to identify early on, because at all 7 of the stakeholder meetings it came up, so it didn't take a rocket scientist to be like, hey, you might need an angel group. Curry and FRA have been really intentional about saying this is one of the things that we're going to take and try to do in the near term. That I think is a good step. In addition, building more connectivity to regional venture hubs, Richmond, Washington, D.C., probably is a good thing for you all to be thinking about. That connectivity in capital kind of blends purple and green here on the screen. So I'd be thoughtful about that. And then from a structure perspective, you know, there are definitely some things that I would say are working in Region 6, but there's also some areas for growth. The community colleges are doing a good job. UMW is doing a good job, but there's still some disconnect across all the counties where they're not necessarily working together. We thought some of the things along food were real opportunities. You know, the idea that you have some folks that are growing or raising crops, oysters, et cetera, connecting those into the regional food markets. So specifically DC, Richmond, but also Fredericksburg, and being intentional about also using that food kind of culture as a means to grow tourism were all components of things that we saw out there. Once we start looking at kind of this broader network, we start going, okay, well, what are the right metrics of success? And a lot of that is where I would lean back on you all to say, here's some things we really want to accomplish. Chapman and Company is good at saying, well, if you want X, these are some ways that you can determine if you're on the right path. We are always reluctant to walk in and say, you should want X, because ultimately it's up to you all to be able to say, here's what we're going to go and do. And, you know, I mean, there's elements of this that I would say, you know, it would be strange if you didn't spend time really focusing on tech transfer around Dahlgren. That feels like an opportunity that sits right in front of you. And if you weren't doing that, I would say, well, that seems like a miss, but like ultimately you all have to decide on some of these things. So I know that the FRA and I know that a bunch of the organizations in the room have already taken that on and are doing intentional things around Dahlgren and tech transfer. So that's my way of saying, I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to look through and say many of the things that you have done over the last 2 years have been intentional and good. I think a lot of what we're going to show you is improvement. The last caveat I will put is we're looking at 2020 data. There's a global pandemic. So some of that data is just, I don't know if I would, how do I say this right? It's going to show growth in company creation. I'm not sure if that's real because it was relatively flat. And then you see this bump up in 2020. And I think some of that is just caused by job losses, et cetera, where people are going out and creating entities so that they have a little bit of income. But I'm speculating based on national data, based on what we've seen in a lot of other locations. 2020 and 2021 so far have been radically improved from a founding of company perspective compared to the rest of the last 2 decades. So some of that might actually be, these challenges created opportunities and people have taken into it. And some of it might be sort of this artificial inflation where people got laid off or lost their jobs and we're creating, an entity to be able to do that. So anyway, we're going to kind of quickly walk through about 30 slides. Stop me if you have questions. I'm going to stop here because this is probably the last good stop for the next 5 minutes. Are there any questions before I move to the next slide?
So this is Rob. I'm looking at this SBIR award count, and I'm very familiar with SBIR, to say the least, and it to me seems almost irrelevant to most of this region, except in a couple pockets. This region is made up of a bunch of regions that vary widely, and you sort of acknowledge that, but I'm not sure these are all the measures do what you want them to do.
So SBIR, I think, is actually an interesting thing for you all to talk about. I will start by saying some of these metrics that are referenced, like SBIR, was in the taxonomy report, and our mission was to go back and look at the taxonomy report and sort of reference them. So to say, how have things changed over the last couple of years? So I would say, even if that were not the case, this is actually something that chunks of the region should really be spending time on. So if you look at the growth in Spotsylvania, Stafford, and Fredericksburg, and you look at where those businesses are being created, what types of industries, a lot of them are in and around government services. So while there are some outlier SBIRs in other parts of the community, or opportunities, I should say, of the region, I still think when you're thinking about how to drive your economy forward, that we should be seeing more SBIRs, even if it's only in a segment of the region, not the whole region. So I think one of the challenges that we saw when we went through the data was those 3 entities, Stafford, Spotsylvania, and Fredericksburg, have some outlying data. So I could point to, for example, per capita incomes. I could talk to number of business establishments. I could talk to just population growth. All of those are a little bit weird. So as we look at sort of Region 6, we think it's not always germane to say, hey, we're going to treat the whole region exactly the same. But I think there are times when being intentional about saying, here's a thing that maybe doesn't apply to everyone, but is important for the whole region. The second reason I think SBIR is actually really important is if you look at the veterans across the entire region, it's high in every single county. It's above the national average in every single county. And there are opportunities throughout the region that could lead to SBIR grants from the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, Department of Ag, that are driven by those relationships that already exist. So I actually think this is an okay measure. I get why it's not a measure of the entire region, but I think it's okay.
I'm not sure that just because there are a bunch of veterans here, that's relevant. What would be more relevant is the educational skew within the veteran population. It probably skews down unless it comes out of the officer ranks, so which is a small percentage and likely not necessarily what lives here. So I'm not sure there's correlation.
I mean, if you look around the country and you just look at counties that have high veteran populations, their percentage of SBIR is correlated higher. It's not statistically significant, i.e. it's not a 0.9, but it is I mean, it is higher than the average population.
But again, you have to know which population of veterans you're talking about.
I mean, I accept your premise.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Curry.
to Rob's point, not in this study, but when we did our last workforce study for Planning District 16, the veteran population here was more educated than the average in the population.
Interesting. And is that distributed across this region, or is it in 3 pockets?
No, it was pretty well distributed across Planning District 16.
And do you have an age breakout for that too?
That I can't answer, but I don't know that it would be materially different. If you look at the number of veterans that maybe Todd could weigh in on this. The number of veterans that are trained or retrained at Germanna every year. It's a pretty healthy number.
Okay, that's all interesting data.
To a point of clarification, when we originally contracted with the Chapman Company, Go Virginia had not notified the regions yet that they were commissioning a economy update. So at either our October or November meetings, Economy will be presenting their data as well, but they have not finished it yet. So we continued our contract with the Chapman Company, and so we can talk about XBIRs more when they present their update.
Good, Tom.
So we broke down, like I said, we broke down our report into those sections. So we'll start with knowledgeable community. Technical knowledge was pretty good across the region. If you look at cool jobs, if you look at that on a county basis, it's obviously haves and have-nots. The community college system was strong, really good really good at re-educating as well as educating. And then University of Mary Washington had the commitment to entrepreneurial education that we thought was good. Some things that we saw as holes when it comes to knowledgeable community. The internet was pretty weak. I mean, if you look at the whole state of Virginia, I think 3 of the counties in Region 6 are the lowest 3 counties in the entire state. That's something I know people are working on, but that, sticks out to us when we start thinking about it. And like we said earlier, there's a programming gap for makers and vendors in e-commerce, particularly if you're looking at main streets. It's probably a good idea to think about how you can start looking at Shopify accounts and other things for people who are producing a product on Main Street to be able to get those into the mail and mail them, understanding Shopify, understanding some of the marketing tools that are out there. Again, we mentioned the no blog or local source of consistent startup news. That's really a signal that we need to do a better job of telling our stories so people can find them and acknowledge them. One of the things we did find was we went and looked at the Inc. 5000. If you look at the last 2 years of the Inc. 5000, you see government services all over it. Rob, I think to your point, this is a signal, hey, there's an opportunity here. I think that opportunity actually goes beyond just Fredericksburg, even though Fredericksburg kind of dominates these rankings. It does seem like there are opportunities to do government services in other parts of the region, particularly down closer to Hampton Roads. It felt like there was some opportunities based on people we were talking there, et cetera, about how there were a number of retired officers who potentially could add businesses, but those businesses were being started outside of the region. So I think being intentional about making it a good place for them to start their business, not just live, is probably a strategy. When it comes to connecting activities, we thought the regional awareness was good. We thought the ability to quickly mobilize. So we had a couple events that we did in a week or less, and people showed up, and that was amazing. That's really atypical. And then I think that we had a number of conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion in a way that a lot of regions are having, but are not having at the depth and intentionality that Region 6 is having. That doesn't mean you're doing great. It just means at least you're being intentional, and that I think your conversations are further along than a lot of the conversations we've had in other parts of the state and in other parts of the country. There continue to be some silos between subregions. So I think even in the call earlier today, when we were talking about site development, there you could hear people talking about the different regions as so almost like separate places. I think it's intentional. I think it's important to be intentional about trying to knock those things down. And there's not a signature event. So one of the things that communities are thinking about, and you're well positioned to be able to do this, is something where you're bringing people from outside the region to your region to showcase both the beauty, the main streets, other things, but also being intentional about what some of your gaps are. So the example I would use is on Capitol. There are a number of capital providers within a 3-hour drive of where you are. Having an event where you're getting those capital providers together with your local angels can be a means to basically break down some of the silos and create an opportunity for those networks to blend fast. And then the ugly, we said very few ecosystem builders. So as we're going around, a lot of the people that are talking about this are really sort of, this is what I do. I start a business, or I'm an economic developer. There's nobody that's thinking about it outside of an individual organization. If you look at application rates, again, this is one of those ones where the numbers all look good, but if you actually look at kind of when they were happening, you're seeing this big bump in 2020, which is more a function of us saying, we're just not sure if that's a real bump or if that's a bump that's driven by COVID. It looks generally like things didn't go down. If we're looking at 2019, they all went up slightly, but I would say the numbers are probably not reflective of the actual growth, but we're speculating because the 2020 numbers are a little bit tricky to identify and really talk about. When it comes to capital, it seemed based on a number of data points that Main Street business capital was readily available. So a number of banks in the region are good lenders. So we often are looking to have a couple community banks be good lenders. We heard that pretty consistently in our interviews and conversations with people, that they felt like their local banking population was pretty engaged and knew what was going on. I think the changing perspective on angel capital and sort of the intent of saying, hey, we need to do this has been good. Grant funding generally was pretty good. And then when we looked at PPP data, you're right at the national average, maybe slightly above. In some counties, it's slightly below. Same with SBA 7A loan data. Those data sets are basically current, meaning we can look at them, you know, and I think the last set we looked at was for the second quarter of 2021. So within that, that's a pretty good reflection that things are going on, that the businesses continue to have access to capital, et cetera, particularly Main Street businesses. From a bad perspective, you know, limited angel and VC capital deployments, there just wasn't much goal. There weren't examples in Crunchbase or PitchBook. That doesn't mean that there aren't small fundings happening. Those are just hard to find with national data. You'll see as we get to the peer analysis later on that there's some other communities that are doing better that I would call comps. I think also from a capital relationships perspective, I would be spending time to build some of those relationships. And then non-traditional equity deals, things like food, commodities, and tourism were pretty much non-existent. In some communities like Region 6, you'll see those opportunities present themselves, and there will be people who are betting on the region and betting on some of those opportunities. I think your initial angel deals will have some of these non-traditional equity opportunities, and I would be thoughtful about saying, are there other, rather than just straight equity, are there other types of financial instruments that we can use to kind of jumpstart some of these activities? So when we look at that, you know, we've talked a little bit about SBIR, so I'm just going to move through it. When we look at venture capital, you know, it's been relatively stable from a number of deals perspective at around 2, but I would say that's not very many compared to what we see around the country. Here's your top 20 investors. We see a lot of government investors in here. Again, that's neither good nor bad, but, you know, Rob, to the question about why we have SBIR, I think it's important to note NSF, DED, Air Force, those are all SBIR providers as well, not just sort of grant providers that are writing research grants. So I'd be intentional about keeping it as part of your quiver and trying to expand it to other parts of the region. In terms of PPP data, you know, our data was, like I said, it was pretty much right at the national average.
Can you go back to that slide? And I just want to, I'm looking for.
Oh, sure.
See if NRV was in there.
This is from PitchBook, so that's where we got the data. I'm happy to share a
But
broader.
it's interesting that I don't see some of the funds that I know from Richmond and other parts of the Commonwealth that are big funds. Okay.
I think this is more instructive, the SBA 7A loan data. You'll see,
Yeah.
and like, I think this is the important kind of chunk that I'm looking at. If you look at where your growth in business lending is happening, it's happening in the northern parts of the region. Some of that's population, but it's not all population. And I would just say over time, we'd like to see some more activity occur throughout the region, not just in those areas. So this will be this would be the piece of information I'd give as like sort of a warning sign, because you get it pretty much real time. If you're seeing this indefinitely, you probably should be seeing a little bit more balance. In terms of structure, university and community colleges were pretty good. Number of veterans was good. You have growth in your population, significant growth. A lot of that is in the northern sections, but it is still significant. And then educational attainment actually is pretty high for the region against the national average. Bad technology transfer needs some work still. That's something I know people have been intentional about over the past 2 years. So I kind of look at that and say, that's one of those things that takes a little bit of time to come to fruition. So you're not going to see instant results. It's a little bit like a venture capital portfolio, in that the first thing you see is actually the bad activity, because the deal you made is usually going to go bad first. Meaning, I make $1 million investment in a transaction and the company's bad. Well, we know that right away. When the company's good, we know that 8 or 10 years down the road. Lack of ecosystem builders, that's kind of a theme that we saw throughout the region, that being intentional about including some more entrepreneurs in the process and building some more ecosystem builders in succession probably is a good strategy for the region. There's some silos in programming. It felt like a lot of the same people were doing the same programs. It didn't feel like there was a lot of diversity and collaboration. And then, we would have really liked to see more food related opportunities that were interrelated, where you're doing things across the region to basically help get products from one part to another part, or even to the next kind of level, so to DC or Richmond, etc. It does feel like there's haves versus have-nots in the region when we look at the data. So some folks are in, high income, high educational attainment counties, and then there's some folks that are in lower income, lower educational attainment, and that data was pretty stark. And then rural broadband, there were those 3 counties that really stuck out.
So Tom, stop. Can you go back to that slide?
Sure.
So what do you mean by interrelated food web across region? Give me an example.
So an example would be, I'm going to use an example from Nebraska, and then I'm going to compare that. So in Nebraska, if you want to have beef on the table at a restaurant, just for the sake of discussion, you'll be able to identify almost down to the farm where the cow was raised, because they're very intentional about tracking that throughout and saying, yeah, this cow is from Wilbur, Nebraska. We're serving it at the Gray Plume. Same thing is true in Iowa with regards to their relationship with hogs, etc. When we went around, what we heard very consistently in the northern neck in the Middle Peninsula was, we have a hard time accessing markets for our oysters. And it seems to me that there's an opportunity there to be able to say, these are oysters that were raised in blank, and have that be a branding opportunity. Beyond that, when we talked to restaurant owners and we said, where do you get their stuff? They would say, oh, it's all regional. It's from Maryland. And so we looked at that and said, well, there's regional, and then there's a lack of understanding that those same opportunities for crabs and oysters are 40 miles away, not just 140 miles away. So that's what we heard was sort of like a lack of awareness really on the food purveyors to what was being grown even in their backyards. Does that make sense?
One of the fastest growing brands on the branded oysters on the East Coast is Rappahannock oysters.
Yep.
Which I've had in New York City and as far down as New Orleans. So is your point that they're selling outside the region, but not so much inside the region?
My point is there should be 10 of those, and there should be those that are doing local, et cetera. I would think of it more like wine, in the sense that when it comes to wine, you have brands that are national. You also have some that are kind of spot, where there's places that are known because you have a whole variety of folks in that are providing wine, not just a single provider. So there are
So
a bunch of small.
roughly 90% of all wine is sold within 50 miles of where it's made.
Correct. So if you look at for example, Napa Valley, and you look at all of the things that have been built around the wine industry in Napa Valley, it goes beyond just the wine. It's also the bottlers, it's the branding and marketing and things of this nature. You have an opportunity to build that entire ecosystem around oysters and crabs in Region 6 that clusters a bunch of activities that are actually beyond the commodity in a way that like other places really don't have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll have to think about it because I think it's complicated.
Let's think about it.
There's a really good article from 1998 called Clusters in the New Economy by Michael Porter. And it goes into these clusters.
I know Michael and I know the article.
What'd you say?
I know Michael and I know the article. It's a good article.
It's a really good article. It goes through these idea of clusters, and I think it's instructive with regards to this interrelated food web.
Think about all the things that go into oysters, from growing to harvesting to shucking to delivery.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you're a small company, you might not be able to afford to do all of those things. So how can you work together with others?
Well, some of these things are interrelated with ecotourism and all the rest of that. And crabs, for example, we're on the wrong side of the life cycle. The crab population get the higher price point. So the higher price point is out of Maryland because that's where the big ones end up as they migrate.
But oysters.
But oysters, yes, but we also provide most of the spat down here to other parts of the East Coast. So it's complicated. But the broad thing about the cluster is, yes, I agree.
Regional change in employment. I don't have many comments on this. It feels like, so from a net perspective, you're net up, but again, it feels like it's driven a lot by your northern counties. You do have some places like Essex where there's a significant negative change over the last 5 years. Establishments, the changes that we're seeing as we look at age of establishment, you're about right where you were 2 years ago. You're a little bit up, but not a ton across the region. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you define establishments?
So establishments, where this comes from is the quarterly census of employment and workforce. And establishments there are defined by places that employ at least one extra person. So an individual person that has a job that they work in their own business don't count as establishments. So you have to employ at least one person. Now, I would say, honestly, the reporting probably is a little sketchy on that exact definition, but that is what it says.
So you're talking anything from restaurants to government to manufacturers, like any industry.
Government is excluded.
Government is excluded. Okay.
Do you want
Government's an industry.
I agree. It's just excluded from the data set. From a demographic perspective, this is where we saw some of those interesting data points in terms of haves and have-nots. So if you look at Spotsylvania and Stafford from an income perspective, from a veteran-owned business perspective, you're seeing kind of different activity than you do across the entire region. There are disparities county to county of almost $50,000 in terms of household income. That's unusual in a region your size. I mean, your region is not geographically huge. It's telling, I would say, and I think the comments today have been thoughtful about what that regional disparity looks like and what are some of the ways that you can start to knock that down, not just in this conversation, but in the earlier conversation. I think it's a tough problem because, you know, you have just some counties that have relatively few people who are driving some of these numbers compared to these counties that are growing like gangbusters. You know, the part of me that says the biggest bang for your buck and intentionality is to really double down on the northern parts of the region. So Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania, and Stafford, because they're the biggest parts of your region and they're showing lots of growth. It also allows you to tap into some of the things that are happening in the DC metro. But as I look at that from an equity perspective, that puts you further and further apart across the region. And I think that's problematic. It's one of the reasons that we think food is a good entree to being able to have hard conversations with some of the regions that are poor, lower population, educational attainment is lower. So, you know, there's a lot that we can unpack just on demographics, but you know, that was one of the reasons that we've kind of mentioned that 3 or 4 times is as we look at this chart, you can really tell the difference between some of the locations and where they are geographically.
Hey, Tom, I have a question. Is that the resident workforce income? That's
Yes.
not area median, that's resident
Yes.
work.
Yeah,
Not
so
necessarily who's working there, but who lives there, that's their income.
yeah, so for Go Virginia's purpose, we don't look at that. We look at the companies, their average median income that they provide for their employees. So it's obviously very different than what the population is making in terms of median income versus what the companies are providing to those people in that region, so, or those localities.
From an educational attainment perspective, again, this is interesting. So places like Fredericksburg and Stafford are near the top of the entire country. And the rest are kind of in that, you can still see the differentiation between King George, Spotsylvania, and some of the other communities that have lower educational attainment. You know, there's a pretty strong correlation here. The exception would be Fredericksburg is kind of the outlier. That with as high as the educational attainment, it's interesting that the income is a little bit lower. Firm ownership, the average in the country is between 8 and 9%. It's real close to 9%. I want to say it's like 8.8%. So as you look down this, anything above that suggests you have a high ownership rate. This vet ownership rate is high. This is one of the reasons that we called this out because this is unusual. Some of that is just you have a lot more veterans on average in all your counties, but this is still pretty high. So
how strongly does minority owned correlate to minority population?
I mean, it's clearly
in this region.
Clearly correlates.
Well,
however, we in our written report, we do call out some counties that have a fairly big disparity between the rate of minorities in the community versus the ownership rate. Off the top of my head, I just can't remember, but I know that 2 counties are there's a pretty big gap between that ownership and population rate where it's abnormal. There is usually some gap, but it's fairly significant in at least 2 of the counties.
And what's the overlap between minority owned and veteran owned?
The data doesn't, we can't get to that level on the data. So I don't have an answer.
Okay, Tom, we're doing a time check. We've got just a hair over 15 minutes for you guys.
We're pretty close. I think we're going to be right on it. So
okay.
We looked at some peer cities. So this is the part where we kind of veered off what Taconomy had done. Just the Taconomy peer cities were not, I didn't think, particularly instructive for Region 6. So Curry and the FRA was nice enough, Jennifer were nice enough to say, why don't you take a look at some other places? And so we went through and looked at places that had significant military populations, folks that for the most part have ports or access to water, because we saw that as being an overlap of some of the food opportunities. And then we tried to find folks that were roughly the same population. 2 weaknesses of this analysis. It was hard to go into a place like Colorado and be able to get a comparable sort of review of some of the rural parts of Colorado and Alaska in particular because of the size of their counties. So you end up having these huge counties that are not super instructive, comparing those to the individual counties. So in general, Region 6 cool jobs is basically STEM jobs. So think science, technology, engineering, math. We include architecture. So within that, that is our sort of quick way of saying, do you have jobs that are likely to be in high growth businesses? It's not the only metric, but we found it to be a pretty good means for us to be able to do that in a quick way. You do okay. The country's average is about 6%. You're at 6.7%. So you're above the country average with regards to cool jobs. That's good. Any questions on this slide? I thought I heard somebody.
No.
Just ask whether Wallop's within Region 6, but it's 5, looking at Huntsville.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Don't worry.
Okay. Don't worry about it.
Carry on.
Yeah, I mean, Huntsville is a hammer in these data sets. I mean, their levels are kind of crazy. But we put them in there intentionally because we think that opportunity exists. Redstone, Arsenal, and Dahlgren have similar mission types, just one for the Army and one for the Navy. So we think there is an opportunity for you to have some data that looks comparable to this. We're not saying that's on the near term, but it's not an accident they're in there. From a total deals perspective, this was a little disappointing as we looked at the data. Like we felt like we were going to see more than we actually saw. As we looked at other places, it was more what our expectations were. One of the things that I want to call out here is your deal size is pretty high. This is not good or bad. This is the amount of dollars per deal. When we start looking at a place like Shreveport, this is a little low, but having something that sits in this $1 to $1.5 million range is usually a signal to us of a place that is really trying to fill the top of their funnel with more deal flow. So we'd like to see more deals and to see this average deal size actually go down so that there are more at-bats going on, so that everything isn't trying to be a double or a home run, but you're taking some things, you're putting some risk capital into grants or early stage funding opportunities. We think an angel group will probably be a pretty good indicator of this number going up and this number going down. We think that's probably good. So I'm partly saying that because often when you look at data, people just assume up is better. Average deal size, generally you want to see it be a little bit lower. One of the reasons that some of these are out here is, Pensacola is a good example. They have one deal that drives most of this. I want to say it's a $120 million deal. That's not necessarily a very good signal that your ecosystem is healthy. Having a big deal is not bad, but you'd rather see more opportunities. So, we were pretty stable at about 2 deals per year. We'd like to see that look like 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, 16, so that you're seeing that increase because it produces more opportunities to have larger companies that are employing more people, et cetera. These are just sort of different ways to look at the same data. So yeah, are there questions?
Doesn't appear to be.
Is that's the presentation?
Yes.
So my only question is, because I have a bunch of things I highlighted in here, but they're not necessarily appropriate to talk about now. What's the next step for this report? I think my things are more implementation.
This report is included as an appendix to our growth and diversification plan. And it outlines, it is what I used to create the priorities that we saw in the earlier today. And so this is the beginning of an entrepreneurial ecosystem report. This was the data analysis piece. That report and those steps are the implementation. They're the next steps to the implementation component. Curry, do you want to talk anything more to that?
Well, how much, Jennifer, is the money from Go Virginia to establish a coordinator still available for the region?
We can use 300,000 of our project money, and that's matched with 150,000 from you all. Or whoever.
Right, so that's still there,
Yes.
correct? Well, what, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but what folks have done or did do, and one of the better examples that is somewhat comparable to our region is the Shenandoah Valley. And Larkin, you're going to have to help me with Stanton Startup's new name. I can't remember it.
I think it's the Stanton Creative Community Fund.
Right. Okay. Right. That was an entity. That entity's been around for about 15 years. The executive director there, after Teconomy, sort of rallied 14, 15 entities from across the region, some of them being Main Street programs, some of them being entrepreneurial programs of James Madison, our counterpart in that region. They took up writing the plan for the entire region and then utilized their grant funding to actually hire 2 ecosystem builders, one basically north of Stanton and one to the south, because there's some economic breaks between the northern part of the Shenandoah Valley and the southern part of the valley. So they put out ecosystem builders. They had, I don't know, it's probably 17 or 18 collaborating entities that they're working with to provide services across the region. So that would have to be the next step, is identifying a coordinator and bringing all the parties to the table from across the region intentionally. And again, I'd stress that, and I think Tom would, the biggest thing that you see in any of the literature or the successful ecosystems is there's no such thing as a closed door. Anybody that wants to come to the table and collaborate, that's the only question. Do you want to collaborate? If you do, come to the table. So I guess, Jennifer, in short answer is we're going to have a discussion about who's the collaborating entity and what would be the next steps to actually write a plan.
No, I mean, it just seems overwhelming, all part and parcel. This is huge. This is a massive undertaking. Site stuff is a big undertaking. Work, it's
a lot.
Yeah.
I think that my intention with this, and well as the executive committee can direct me otherwise, was to be strategic in what we were doing instead of just saying do anything like we've done in the past 4 years, to try to narrow our focus a little bit and be specific. We've seen the cusp of everything. Haven't really gotten anywhere. So this is the specific steps to move forward.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Can I respond a little bit to Kim's point? One difference, there are already a lot of people, a lot of players in the region. If you think about it broadly, there are a lot of people who, there's a ton of Main Street programs, good ones, across the region. And we've spoken to several of them outside of our own region, and they love the concept of borrowing from each other and finding more assets for their businesses. This one is a little bit different than sites. It's not dependent on governments doing anything. it's something where we've already got players who want to do something. It's just how do you get them all working within a solar system, if you will? So across all three of these, I actually think this is the least daunting to work on than the other two.
Yeah, no, I can see that, and I was making notes in the margins, just a few groups that I know that do this kind of stuff, but I think I saw, consistently with the document, the ecosystem referred to as it. And it's hard for me to think about how there's some single person or entity that can bring all these folks together on a Region 6 wide basis and foster this ecosystem from Stafford all the way to Gloucester. That to me seems very overwhelming.
Well, there's already some collaboration going on between Stafford and VIMS that came out of these sorts of discussions around Stafford's Smart City program. And then what VIMS has a concept of going after some of the EDA Build Back Better money for their shoreline resiliency work, that having available the smart city technology and collaborative space they got in Stafford could be put to use in the VIMS grant application. So those, I think it's a question of connecting the dots. I don't think it's geographically daunting. It's no bigger than the Shenandoah Valley region. As a matter of fact, we have fewer localities in Region 6 than they do. So you're right, it's not going to happen overnight, but you're talking about building an ecosystem where people are welcome. And I think, again, it's a collaboration of the willing.
And it's probably a fair statement to say that if it's all involving private sector, it'll move a lot faster. and more openness to collaboration and sharing.
Well, the other thing, and the state uses a word I don't like when it comes to ecosystems, that you need a quarterbacking entity. That implies one entity calls all the plays, and that's not what this is about. What you need is an entity that almost has some gravitational pull like the sun, but you still got individual planets doing their thing and spinning within their orbit, but yet they're willing to beg and borrow from each other as best they can. So you don't have one entity calling all the shots. As a matter of fact, you don't want to have that.
Yeah.
Lisa just posted a regional convener. That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, and not to belabor the point, Mr. Chairman, but just thinking about how do we translate what Curry's talking to in our council moving those things forward. That's always been my struggle. Is this is all amazing. We've had lots of amazing presentations. How do we translate that into getting the folks in this room and on the call for when we have a full council meeting to move these priorities down the line?
Well, I think it goes back to having the what was the term that we're supposed to have had already anyway? A coordinating entity.
Yeah.
I
like that.
No, that's the quarterback. That's not.
That was Ross Baird's term.
Yeah.
I mean, and maybe this executive committee discusses how to best roadshow this and the priorities.
Collaborating entity.
Well, Mr. Chairman, not to get the cart before the horse, this is supposed to come out as part of the next stage in the plan. We have had a discussion with our board could we host under our auspices a convening entity? In short, the FRA would establish a separate 501c3. While there might be some FRA board members on it, the board would be made up of people from across all of Region 6. Again, those willing to come to the table and collaborate. We would use some of the Go Virginia money to hire an executive director of that organization, whatever we choose to call it, and to start kicking this off. That would be where you'd have to start.
What if you did it by potential sector instead? So I was thinking like, if we were to take the seafood sector and clusters and all of that, and I certainly know a couple companies in that space that are early stage and or maritime and or marine. and did something down towards VIMS.
Well, this doesn't preclude that. And
But
VIMS,
the idea would be-
I've already talked to VIMS about participating in this sort of a project.
But VIMS is actually not involved with any of the ones that I'm aware of at the moment. But whether with one, but it's all of the early stage companies I know in the spaces that I was talking about earlier are independent of all of the institutional forces in its regions.
So I'm not sure I'm following what you're asking.
I'm not sure the institutions are aware of or in tune with the entrepreneurial community. I guess that's what I'm saying in some ways. Which
In
is-
some pockets,
Which is-
that's probably true.
Yeah,
No.
But again, I don't think,
yeah,
those sorts of things could be serviced by your ecosystem builders.
yeah.
Because while some of the institutions may be at the table, they're not necessarily the ones out in the field doing the work.
I'm sorry, y'all, I'm gonna have to scoot.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Whoa,
everybody.
wait. I think that gets us without a quorum.
Yes, we don't have anything to do. No.
We're good? We're good. You may leave.
Okay, sorry.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to try to wrap up here because we need to try to wrap up here. We have been, trying to find ways to communicate to both the growth and diversification plan and other things we are doing. We've had some fits and starts about doing things at boards of supervisors meetings, and it's been a while since we've done that. But what we'd like to try here, if the executive committee is agreeable, of course, we've got to have a willing partner to this proposal, is that Jennifer and a council member from that particular area would try to get on the agenda of the 3 planning districts before our October 18th meeting and see if we can have a time to go over the growth and diversification plan, and I guess a little bit of the ecosystem. Because that, if we did that and that's going to take up a lot of time. So we need to think about how to make that concise. But is everybody agreeable? I got a nodding head here.
Yeah.
Lisa, Morgan says, okay. Lisa just looks at me.
I don't know if we're going to be meeting or not.
Huh?
I don't know if we will be meeting or not.
Yeah, well,
So,
all we can do is ask.
Hey, Billy, this is Morgan. Your idea of getting on the Board of Supervisors agendas for all of the localities is not a bad idea. I know it would be a lot of time on Jennifer. But I work directly with my board, obviously, but there are not a lot of counties that have the county administrator sitting on Go Virginia. I don't know to what degree the board members are even in tune with what Go Virginia has to offer and what it's doing. A 10 or 15-minute presentation at board meetings over the next 3 or 4 or 5 months wouldn't be a terrible thing.
So just as a point of order, I think all of these boards of supervisors will be changing. in November.
Some, not all. There's some elections this year. There's some counties that are not staggered to where there will not be an election this year. It just depends on how boards stagger.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you can figure out that.
So-
around that.
Maybe Rob, maybe we look at January for those boards that do have a changeover.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But getting in front of the boards with
Yeah, no,
Go
that's a
Virginia
good
is
idea.
not a terrible idea. I mean, you might,
Good
PDCs are fine too, but
It's a good idea because that's a good way to gauge,
We're going to go like that.
you know, their likely receptivity.
Which one? Oh, yeah, there's some things that are on the agenda that, there's about project status update. There's gonna be some pieces of that we're gonna bump to October, but, Morgan, do you have any update on the Richmond County piece?
Yes, I do. I submitted to Jennifer last Friday a letter. Our board did submit a letter withdrawing our grant. Very appreciative of working on this grant. I've gone over this several times with this board, so I'm not going to go back over it. But very appreciative of it. We were very much looking forward to it. You know, another opportunity presented itself, and in small counties like Richmond, you can't always choose. We don't have the pick of the litter when it comes to different projects. This one didn't exactly align with where we were going on this property, but it aligned somewhat. And so we're going that direction.
All right. Well, we wish you luck and look forward to you having another proposal for us on some other piece of property.
And that very well may be possible.
Yep, that gets us up to date there. The financial reports are in the package. Any questions on those? Okay, you want to talk about Gen Ed?
Yes, so only thing to bring up is Gen Ed. As a reminder, this was a statewide Go Virginia project that every region in the state signed on to, including ours, to help reshore manufacturing into the state of Virginia. The beginning was dedicated to PPE and things that related to COVID, and now it's open to anything. Region 6 has not had a single proposal in either side of that, and I'm trying to work with Gen Ed to get companies to apply for their programming and their funding. I'm going to send around the information again. It's not my job, but it looks bad on Region 6, so we're trying to work with them and figure out how we can get some companies into the program.
Yeah. Well, it's not like we are, of course, I could be wrong. Curry can correct me, and Lisa, but I'm not sure we're overrun with manufacturing companies.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think we are. But,
Ones that want to reshore, and they
Yeah.
restructured their board
yeah. Go
they
ahead.
restructured their board to meet, so Steve's no longer on it, and that was our one connection into the program.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where we are with that.
Billy,
Okay. Yes,
about,
Kurt.
I would say about 20 to 25% of our lead activity is some form of manufacturing. And that's mostly driven by the skill set in the region. So,
Yeah.
you know, we've got some electric vehicle testing, R&D, light manufacturing. And then we're working with VEDP, and I think it's 5 other regional EDOs because of our workforce and geography, everything medical, manufacturing, from equipment to pharma. We've got quite a bit of activity in that, and the state has targeted us for marketing for those industries.
Okay.
Do you have a list of those, Curry?
A list of,
Companies like that, like the ones you've just checked off?
well, most of the time we can't share that even if we know who they are.
They
Because
haven't
we're under NDAs.
Oh, so they haven't come to the region. Okay,
No, they have not. These are folks we're marketing to.
okay.
All right, that brings us to the end of our meeting. If there are no objections, we'll now request a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. Lisa,
Second.
one of y'all wanted to second?
Second.
Morgan second. You call the roll. Get Lisa and Morgan.
Lisa,
Aye.
Morgan,
And 2 in the room?
Aye.
Aye. All right, we're good. Thank you very much for your time, everyone.
thank you.